Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. Here's your host, Morgan Colby and Rick Lemon.
Welcome to the Fantasy Champions Fantasy Football Podcast. My name is Morgan Colby. Got Rick Lemon right across from me.
What's up?
It's Tuesday, March 12th, which means that we are one day. We're recording this on Tuesday, March 12th. We are one day away from the official start of the new league year for the NFL. And it's been a busy 2 days.
Yeah, you could say that.
I thought the legal tampering period started on Sunday at 1 o'clock. I was sorely mistaken because nothing happened, and I was like, where's all the news? And then Monday morning I woke up and I was like, holy crap, what happened?
There it is.
So it's been an interesting couple days, lots of moves. We are only going to go over a couple today, and we're probably going to do a whole show designated just to free agency. Probably, yeah. So we got a great...
We should have just a whole show about where Blake Bortles is going to end up.
Yeah, that's the real question. Where is Bortles going to go?
Fantasy owners need to know
We
this
need to
question.
know. Blake Bortles next year is going to carry you to a fantasy championship.
Someone should
Mark my words.
I should save that clip. Blake Bortles is going to carry you to a fantasy championship.
We got a great show prepared for you today. This episode of All That Glitters, we continue the series, and we're going to be talking wide receivers. I just want to preface this by saying any breaking news that comes across our wavelength, we will bring it to you. But we're going to break down the top 10 to 15 finishers, roughly, of the wide receiver position and discuss if they were truly good in the 2018 season, or are they a flash in the pan. But before we get started, make sure you follow us on Twitter and Instagram and like us on Facebook at the FF Champs on Twitter and everywhere else at the Fantasy Champions. Subscribe wherever you listen, leave a review, and share this podcast with your friends.
So before we get started, and just in case we have breaking news, do you want to just test the sound?
Oh,
of the
yeah.
audience?
Yeah, this is what you'll
Just
like.
in case.
This is what you'll hear.
Breaking news.
So if you hear that, that means Le'Veon Bell signed.
That means I won another fantasy championship.
Stop. Just stop.
That means Blake Bortles is a New England Patriot.
Yeah, Blake Bortles going to the Pats. That would be something. I'd actually get physically ill.
In a good way, right?
Yeah, in a good way.
I'm puking in excitement.
Let's start the show by talking about two big moves that happened. I'm more inclined to talk about one because it just happened tonight. But we'll start with the first one. Antonio Brown getting traded to the Oakland Raiders. I feel like finally all the drama in Steelers land is coming to an end. He was traded to the Steelers for a 3rd and a 5th round pick.
Pretty surprising return.
Pretty surprising return when you're talking about AB. I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that he A, demanded a trade, B, wanted $1,005,000, and
yeah,
and he's kind of a
his list
to me
of teams
he's a liability. I don't think he's a locker room problem because everyone loves him, but I think he can become a problem if the opportunity springs up, like him and Big Ben getting into issues. So I think that, not that Antonio Brown's going to be a problem in Oakland, but I just think there was all kinds of factors, like when you trade Cooper to the Cowboys. You know what I mean? It was a 1st round pick.
Right.
Cooper really isn't. He's talented. There wasn't really any, I guess financial implications to that trade. So you make it, and it makes sense. I just think it's funny that you traded for maybe over the last 5 years, the best wide receiver in the NFL.
Yeah.
And you trade a 3rd and a 5th to get him, and you got a 1st round pick in return for Amari Cooper.
That is pretty nuts.
Basically not even, like, people are, why would you do that? I'm like, that's a great move right there. You got a free 1st round pick for a guy.
Is. Although, I mean, I will say this. Do we know what direction the Raiders are going in? Are they tanking? Are they winning now?
Idea.
Are they? Because last year they were talking about the 10-year plan. They traded Khalil Mack. They traded Amari Cooper.
Yeah.
They had a ton of draft picks. Like, they're going to really rebuild this team. And here we are a few months later. They trade for a 31-year-old wide receiver who's potentially past his prime, and the window for winning with him
Yeah.
is very, very small.
Oh, it's tiny.
And there's talks about maybe getting Le'Veon Bell, and they're not done in free agency. They're still going after some key and big names. Are they going for it? Like,
I think they are. I think Mike Mayock, their new GM, has a huge
first-round arm talent.
Yeah, first round arm talent. I think he has a huge say in what's going on right now.
Yeah.
I think as much as people want to put it on Mike Mayock, I think it is John Gruden pulling the strings because this is John Gruden's team. That was so hard to say.
They're probably working together though on it.
Right, they're working very closely. But I've never seen a team do something like this. Like they're making. They signed, Patriots left tackle Trent Brown.
Mm-hmm.
They're moving their good right tackle over to. Their good left tackle over to right tackle. So that's a great move for their offensive line. But just as a team, they're adding a lot of pieces all at once, and it could be very good, and it also could be very bad.
Could backfire.
It could backfire big time. But as far as Antonio Brown, it kind of scares me a little bit in terms of fantasy football. Because as much as I love Antonio Brown and as talented as he is, I don't think Derek Carr blows. I think he's decent, and I think him throwing to Brown, he's the only receiver on the team outside of Jared Cook. So you're going to be
Jordy Nelson.
And Jordy Nelson, yeah, I don't even think he's. I think he's
isn't he free agent?
Yeah. So, but Antonio Brown, he's just not going to be. I don't think he's going to be what he was before, and I think that's mostly because he's not going to get the targets that he did before. I think he'll still produce as maybe a top 5 to 7 wide receiver, but I would be surprised next year if we see AB in the top 3, like he was this year.
And it's come to an end of people potentially picking him first overall in leagues. Like, remember those days?
Yeah,
last
year.
Even dude,
the last
even
2 years.
Yeah, the last few years, honestly.
Yeah,
he's not a first round pick. I don't even know. I mean, if you're taking him in the second round, I think you're pushing it a little bit too.
There's other guys there. Don't.
He is still Antonio
he's very
Brown.
good. Like, he's
still going to produce.
Is that I will take Antonio Brown if he's coming in the late second, early third round.
Don't go out of your way for him.
Don't go out of your way for him. If you're taking him like really early, like there's other guys there. You're talking about fantasy drafts in a redraft league. If you're in half PPR or a standard league, even full PPR, you're drafting running backs. Those guys are coming off the board with like the first 6 to 8 picks. And so you're talking about the best wide receivers, the top 5 wide receivers in the NFL. When I think there's 5 guys ahead of Antonio Brown right now, probably. But you have a bunch of guys available and early in the second round, and you're going to take Antonio Brown. I just think that's taking a leap. And if he works out, then a lot of you are going to be like, you idiot. You told me not to draft Antonio Brown. That's fine. But as of right now, I just don't like if the Raiders add, like I told you before the show, if the Raiders add Le'Veon Bell, then I think Antonio Brown could be a very, very good asset. Does that bump his value? I think it bumps his value. I think it bumps the entire Raiders. Like Jared Cook becomes very valuable as well. As much as people hate the guy, I think he becomes valuable at the tight end position.
Things could change over time. Like, especially it's still very early. But I do like Derek Carr's value from this a lot, like potentially drafting him because I know he was not getting drafted in any leagues before this.
Right.
After this, I definitely would look at him very late in the draft, obviously, but I'd keep an eye on him. And, Antonio Brown, right now, I see him as a third-round pick, and I was saying I wouldn't go out of my way for him, and I would still shy away. But I want to see how it looks because, I don't know, I could be intrigued by it. Yeah. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, definitely.
It's interesting.
I do want to bring up the one implication that it does have for the Pittsburgh Steelers. There's 2 schools of thought with Juju Smith-Schuster, and we will talk about him later in the show, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on him, but there's the school of thought that he is going to become the number 1, and he's going to get the main coverages, and he's not going to be as good as he was in the past, as good as he was with Antonio Brown.
Because they're going to double him and stuff. Yeah.
And then there's the other school of thought that he's going to get the AB targets, so he has to produce like AB. Now, I'm in the middle. I'm like I think Juju could finish in the top 6, just because like I think he finished in like the top 12 this year. That's my guess. I think he was 8. And so I think Juju we'll talk about him a little bit later, but I think Juju will take a step forward this year. Let's move to the next trade and then go on to all the glitters. But Odell Beckham, right before this show,
Your guy.
was traded from the New York Giants
To your other guy.
to my team. And I'm a Patriots fan, but my team and my boy, Baker Mayfield, they're traded to the Browns. Odell is now a Cleveland Brown. I was literally I want to say that I got a bloody nose right before this news happened. I'm holding the tissue to my face, and all of a sudden I get the alert that Odell is traded to the Cleveland Browns. I literally was like, yes! And then Katie was like, what are you talking about? Why are you screaming? I'm like, Odell is a Brown. So that's all I needed.
Aren't you a Patriots fan? No.
I'm a Browns fan.
I'm a Baker Mayfield fan.
So I love it. I absolutely love it. It was a lot to give up. Quite a bit.
Asking price is too much.
Yeah.
I'm glad the Patriots didn't.
Yeah, I'm glad they didn't jump in. I'm wondering what the Pats offered, but they'll get the New York Giants get a first-round pick, and then the second of the Browns' third-round picks, and then safety Jabril Peppers,
Who's solid.
So they got a nice return, but what was given is like a lot. It was a lot.
Yeah. I mean, on paper, the Browns have the best team in the AFC North now. And is it really even close? Are the Ravens kind of still pretty solid?
No. If
On
the
paper,
Browns don't win the division,
bust.
I would huge bust. As much as people want to buy in on the Steelers, I don't see what the appeal
That being
is.
said, I think it could very easily happen still. So here's my thing with the Odell trade. I was on the Baker Mayfield and Cleveland Browns trade. If you guys have listened to the previous podcasts, I've been on that train. After this move, I'm a little cautious because here's why. Everybody's hopping on the train now. Everybody. Baker Mayfield's value just shot up by not just one round, not 2 rounds, but it's probably going to be, he'll probably be one of the first 3 quarterbacks off the board after this move. Mm-hmm. You have Jarvis Landry, you have Kareem Hunt, you have Nick Chubb, you have Odell Beckham Jr., you have David Njoku in your offense. That is loaded.
Yeah.
I mean,
you got a lot of pressure.
It is. However, if Mayfield's going late in your draft, you better take him.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
Because it's all about the value in this situation. I'm scared that his value is going to go up way too high.
So I tweeted out earlier today when the deal went through, I tweeted out that Odell was my number 1 quarterback on my draft board. So I did preface this, not my tweet, but I will preface this by saying that, yes, all of the good quarterbacks are still ahead on my draft board. Don't worry about that.
He's just your number 1 to go to.
Yeah, he's my one. He's my when I get to the 10th round and I start thinking a quarterback, I'll probably take a strong look at let's just say if he's on the board in the 10th round and I'm picking, you can very well guarantee that I'm taking Baker Mayfield. But as in terms of, I mean, a lot of people are talking about the value that it gives, guys like Kareem Hunt, Nick Chubb, David Njoku, even Jarvis Landry. I think this trade improves the entire offense in general and all of the fantasy options that are inside that offense. The question for me is, what does this do for Odell's fantasy value? Because is he gonna be? I mean, you can't get much worse than Eli Manning in that Giants offense. So do you expect a bump or do you expect him to kind of take a hit statistically?
I think it's going to be slight improvement. And the reason why I say slight is because he's still going to get, Njoku's still going to get a lot of targets.
Yeah.
Jarvis Landry's still going to get a lot of targets. They're going to use Nick Chubb. When Kareem Hunt comes back, they're going to use Kareem Hunt. There's just a lot of guys that they're going to use in that offense. But you're right. I mean, it is. He went from Eli Manning to Baker Mayfield. And I'm not saying Baker Mayfield is
second coming.
Right. But at this point in his career, I mean, I want to, and Blake Bortles is just as good as Eli Manning at this point, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Eli Manning, I don't think is a very good quarterback at this point in his career.
Harsh take.
But I think it's just facts at this point. But Baker Mayfield is the opposite of Manning. He's on the rise. So he's a much improved player. The whole offense is better as a whole, which I think will probably help Odell, but maybe have a little less targets. Like it'd be interesting to see how it plays out, but I would consider his value improved after the steal.
Yeah, I do. I do see a little bit of a statistical bump. Last year, he was having a very, very good season until he got hurt right around week 13, I believe it was. And then after that point, it was kind of, obviously he wasn't able to play, but he finished in the top 10 in half PPR fantasy points, 100 and actually, I'm sorry, he did not finish in the top 10. He finished in the top 15 at number 14 with 191 fantasy points. We'll talk about him a little bit later if we have time, but to me, if he had played those 4 games, he probably would have finished above Juju and Julio, who were 7 and 8. So I think he would, the way he was playing this year was very good, even with a crappy Eli Manning. So I think in a good offense, it would benefit him.
Is he a top 3 fantasy receiver?
I don't think so. I as much as I love Odell, I don't see that as a situation for him to. I don't know. I just don't see this at least in the first year with a young quarterback. I don't see him taking that leap, and there is a lot of weapons on the team, so you may also see a target decrease for Odell. Whereas, like when you were in New York, you were the guy. Like Evan Ingram hurt 90% of the time.
Right, which is kind of what I was alluding to.
And Saquon, obviously is one of the main targets. But outside of that, it was just Odell. So it's like, you might see a target decrease for Odell Beckham. But as an early look, I think it does help his fantasy value. But let's move on to our first segment, All That Glitters.
Let's go. All That Glitters.
So we are going to discuss the top finishing wide receivers from the 2018 season. I want to preface this by saying all stats are based on half PPR, and that will be the same thing for the running backs next week. I will preface it next week so people don't complain. These are weeks 1 through 16. All of this is based on weeks 1 through 16 because we don't believe in week 17 championships. That'll be a discussion when we get to a show later this year on league rules. Don't do week 17 championships. It's not worth it.
We've both got screwed over from it.
Yeah, never. We'll discuss the realities of wide receiver finishes in 2018, and our goal is to help you look at last year and dissect last year's numbers and tell you if they continue production this year and if you should draft these guys. So let's get to it. Number 1 finisher of last year in half PPR, 274 fantasy points, Davante Adams. Adams was everything that a lot of people would say, because we personally are in a standard league that's switching to half PPR.
Yep.
I played in some half PPR and full PPR leagues, but Adams, I was surprised to see finish as the number 1 guy. I had to kind of double take because I didn't have him on any of my fantasy teams.
Yeah.
He went from being like the 3rd wide receiver on a team 2 or 3 years ago to now being like the guy. And I've always questioned, like, everyone loves Davante Adams, but I've always questioned
why?
Like, I don't see the talent there in my brain. I just don't. I think it's all Rodgers, and if he was on any other team, he would blow.
Yeah, I wouldn't go that far, but he's a solid receiver.
Yes, he's a great receiver.
But
he runs. He's a good receiver.
And Aaron
He's
Rodgers
talented,
trusts him, which makes a huge difference because a lot of Rodgers' offense and the Packers' offense went through Davante Adams. Jimmy Graham didn't do much. Randall Cobb didn't do much. The few receivers that showed up, what was his name? I don't remember his name, but there was a few Packers receivers that like had flashes in the pan. But for the most part, that entire passing offense went through Davante Adams. And I was kind of on the same boat with you. I was never like a big Davante Adams fan.
Yeah.
But looking at the numbers,
not a big Davante Adams truther.
He is insanely consistent.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Like, insanely consistent. You want to bring up the bust percentage?
He busted only 7% of the time this year. And he played 15 games.
7%.
7%. That means he busted one game.
Time.
One game.
That can win you a regular season title at least. that gets you the best record.
Yeah.
If you have a receiver that consistently gets you 15 fantasy points.
Yeah.
And when we say consistently, we legitimately mean consistently every week but one. That is a difference maker.
It's absolutely insane.
He played very, very, very well this past season.
Yeah. I think he averaged 18.3 points per game. That is when you only bust 7% of the time and you're averaging that many fantasy points,
right?
You're very, very consistent. On our consistency rank, he finished number 1 in all of fantasy. His home road split basically even. So, every time Aaron Rodgers stepped on the field, this is the guy. Mm-hmm. There's no one else on that team.
So is that changing?
No, it's not changing at all. So it's like next year, if you are looking at a wide receiver, if whether you're in the first round, I don't recommend taking wide receiver in the first round, but if you're in the first round and a bunch of running backs come off the board and you're like, frick, I need,
you're at pick like 9.
Yeah, you're at 9 and you're like, I would just take I'd take a wide receiver here. Take Davante Adams. I'm having a hard time picking who I want number 1 on my personal top 5, top 10, wide receivers, and obviously. It's not an easy decision to pick out which guy is going to be the best. But when you look at the Packers' situation right now, there's no one else. Like Jimmy Graham's not. I don't think he's going to be on the Packers next year. All you got is Aaron
Cobb's
Jones,
a free agent.
Randall Cobb's a free agent. They got Marquez Valdez-Scantling. I think there's going to be a guy that comes up the ranks a little bit, but Adams is going to be
the guy still.
He's going to be the guy. He's going to be the guy that gets you the points. So next year, I'm not afraid of drafting him. I think he'll stay just as consistent. And when you're with the wide receiver position being so inconsistent with so many different guys, the next closest guy to him was, I think, 13%. I believe that was what the consistency rank had. Number 2 is at 12.5%. So he's like a good full 6% ahead of somebody else.
Wow.
And I think if you want a consistent wide receiver, Davante Adams, I have so much trouble putting him at 1 because I think he's just a benefactor of having Aaron Rodgers. Honestly, I think a lot of people are like, this guy's so talented, he's amazing. And I'm like, well, Jordy Nelson was talented and amazing, and then he left. And now he's nothing.
Right.
And it's
that doesn't matter. If we're talking
right now, yeah, it doesn't matter.
Right, that's what I'm saying.
I've always strayed away from Davante Adams because I have absolutely when I watch him,
I think he's decent.
I think he's decent, but
he is good, but he's just compared to like Antonio Brown,
the talented
Odell
wide
or Julio
receivers,
Jones,
like Odell, DeAndre Hopkins. These guys,
right? Yeah,
these guys could step into on any team and still produce. And I think Adams is just the opposite of that. I think he just gets a lot of production. So. Obviously, very early in the offseason. We don't know what the Packers are going to do. But if everything kind of stays the same, you can expect Adams to get more increased production, especially in an offense where Rodgers kind of now runs the whole thing. So I really like Davante Adams for next year. I don't think you should be nervous about taking him at all.
Yep, agreed.
Number 2, Antonio Brown. Now an Oakland Raider. He was a Pittsburgh Steeler. He played in, I believe it was 14 games because he missed... Actually, no, he played 15. He missed week 17, but we don't count that. So his consistency rank was number 4, and he averaged 18 points per game.
Very solid.
AB, yeah, if you drafted him in the last 5 years, you really didn't go wrong.
Right, yeah.
It was surprising to see him in a half PPR setting finish second, because a lot of people would consider this a down year for Antonio Brown. But for what he did this year, it was basically almost identical to what Davante Adams did. There was a little bit more bust. He busted 15% of the time.
Yeah.
So I think he wasn't as consistent as he normally is. But for him to finish second in half
that's
PPR,
still solid. 15%.
It's
still
solid.
Very good.
As we talked about before, the problem with AB is that he's completely switching teams, and he's headed to the Oakland Raiders. And I just don't know. I personally, I'll make a prediction at some point. I'm not going to be a flake. But Antonio Brown, I just think he's going to see a target decrease. And I think that if you were just going, okay, I'm copy pasting last year's, numbers and putting him on my, my spreadsheet for fantasy.
No, it's going to be different.
Yeah, it's going to be different. You might see him, like I said, 6 or 7. So as far as Antonio Brown goes, I don't think he's going to finish 2 next year. I think he's a good option, like I said, 2nd, 3rd round. But as of right now, AB is not going to be the same receiver that he was last year.
So I do have it's kind of developing as I talk about this. I like Derek Carr. And I think Antonio Brown
this is not a popular opinion. People
not.
are listening to this
I know.
podcast going, I'm going to turn you guys off in 3 seconds.
Yeah, no. I know it's not. I do like Derek Carr. I think last year he, as you told me earlier about the numbers that he had 19 touchdowns, but every other stat, statistically speaking, he was one of his best of his career, and he had no talent around him. Now you add Antonio Brown. I really don't mind Antonio Brown in Oakland.
Yeah, I mean, it's better than the Bills.
I think it is better than the Bills.
Yeah,
is he going to be the fourth most consistent wide receiver in the second half PPR? I don't know. I don't think so, but I don't think he's going to drop off that much because he is going to get a lot of. I think he's going to get a lot of targets in Oakland because Jared Cook's going to get some targets, but other than that, who's the next wide receiver? And we've said with Juju Smith-Schuster that some of the problems that people have with him is he's going to get double teamed and he's never been the number one wide receiver before. How is he going to handle it? Antonio Brown has been that his whole career. He's not going to have a problem with the team's best corners against him. Right. He's still going to succeed. Plus, maybe a potential increase in targets.
Yeah,
I don't mind this at all.
I think. I mean, my only problem is that AB. The reason why he produces as consistently as he has, not just in game to game, but like season to season, is because the Packers, the Steelers. I'm still thinking about Adams. The Steelers are a team that throws. This year they were number one.
That is true. Yep.
They were number one in pass attempts, and so. And then, when you look at the Oakland Raiders last year, they were, Derek Carr was 12th in pass attempts. So it's like if you have a full 11 quarterbacks ahead of you, unless the Oakland Raiders decide to start throwing the ball as much as the Steelers were, which I don't see that happening, especially if they get some kind of running game. It's just not going to equal as much production for Antonio Brown. Yes, he's going to be the number one guy. Yes, he's going to be targeted.
They're going to force it to him, too.
If the guy is targeted as much as he was in Pittsburgh, I would not. He's talented. He's good. Unless he starts showing his old age or something like that, I just don't see it. Like, if Antonio Brown is getting the targets, he's going to produce the same. Like, it's just what's going to happen to me. I think Derek Carr is good enough to get Antonio Brown the ball. Simple as that. Let's move on. Tyreek Hill, number 3, 258 fantasy points. This is an interesting guy.
Yeah,
because
I know you want to go off.
He finished number. You know what's interesting? I just as a side note, the Chiefs had a top player in 3 different positions and almost 4 if Kareem Hunt didn't.
Yeah, that's actually insane.
Isn't that crazy?
That's what Browns fans are hoping for this year.
Yeah, exactly. But Tyreek Hill is a guy who I have such a hard time liking, and I like the production. I like the 40 fantasy point games. I like the 35 fantasy point games. I like the 33 fantasy point games.
He pops on your screen.
Yeah, he pops, and then all the and then you get people lining up. You own him on your fantasy team. You get people lining up to try to trade for him, and you're like, not today. And then you're like 6 points. Hey guys, you want to do the trade? No. So his consistency rank 21.
Wow. That is a telling number.
21. He was all the way down. And if you were basing your draft, don't ever do this, but basing your draft specifically on consistency ranks, he would be a wide receiver 3 based on consistency rank. And he busted 53% of the time.
Wow.
I just want to let you know that a bust is being under 12 fantasy points. That is terrible.
He had under 12 fantasy points 53% of the time.
He played weeks 1 through 16 every single game, 15 games, and he busted 8 out of 15. So that means, to me, if you have a guy like that on your team, I never can justify, the ends with the means. You know what I mean? Like, you got to draft him with a second round pick, and then, you're expecting him to produce that all season long, like an AB or, Adams or Hopkins or Julio Jones, and you're expecting Tyreek Hill to bring you that production. And it's like, it astounds me that he busted 53% of the time, yet he still finished with 258 fantasy points. Like that, 258. That is absolutely insane to me. If he is
plus
in the second or third round, and I'm sitting there and I'm looking at him to draft, there's 2 wide receivers that I don't like, and I'll talk about the next one later. But Tyreek Hill is a guy that I'm probably going to draft in the second or third round. When I draft, I don't like to, just a quick tip, but when I draft, I don't like to look at guys as, or look at my team as, this team's standing pat. This is the team that I'm going to roll with all season. I look at it as, okay, I may not like this guy, but I'm going to take him, and I'm going to, try to deal him. Like, take Tyreek Hill, wait till after he gets that blow-up game, then deal him to the people who line up to take him. And it's like, if that's what you're going to do for Tyreek Hill, then do it. Don't be afraid to draft a guy because you see his bust percentage being horrible. Yes, if there's another guy on the, like if I'm choosing between, DeAndre Hopkins and Tyreek Hill, I'm taking Hopkins. I'm not taking Hill. But,
right.
If Hill's the only option at wide receiver on your board and you were supposed to take a wide receiver there, you don't have a wide receiver one, take him, deal him for a guy that you want later down the road. You know what I mean? You could take Hill, package him with another running back for a team who's weak on running back, and try to get Hopkins or something like that. It sounds like I make it sound easy. It really isn't. But Hill is a guy that if I'm in the third round and he's there, I'm taking. But I'm kind of leery on him. My other concern, before I finish my point, is that Tyreek Hill no longer has, like, last year when they started the season, they had Kareem Hunt, and they had some other options in the passing game, and now they don't. And so it's like, how is he going to respond to that? Is he going to, like the Patriots in the AFC Championship game? The Patriots always struggled against Tyreek Hill, and that's because they always struggled against Kareem Hunt, right?
They'd bite on the play action.
They bite on the play action. Without Kareem Hunt, they were like, Let's stop Tyreek Hill. And so I think Tyreek Hill is going to be affected by that. At some point, this man's going to come down to earth.
Right.
I'm not that I hope it's next year, but I'm going to put a big buyer beware.
So that's my thing with Tyreek Hill, and I like the Chiefs. I like the Chiefs offense. I have the last 2 seasons. But we both agree, and I love Mahomes. I think everybody knows that.
Yeah.
We both agree. I don't think he's going to throw 50 touchdowns again this season.
Nope.
Tyreek Hill, if Mahomes takes a step down, you're not looking at Tyreek Hill being the third fantasy wide receiver fantasy points wise.
Yeah.
And we both agree that he's going to take a step down.
Yeah.
So that alone could factor in being kind of wary on Tyreek Hill.
Yeah.
But then you add into the bust percentage as well. I'm very nervous with Tyreek Hill. I stay away from him. I take guys like Devontae Adams. I take DeAndre Hopkins. I take Michael Thomas. I take Julio Jones. Like, I take a lot of guys before I go to Tyreek Hill.
Yeah, Tyreek Hill falls not way down the draft board, but to me he falls to like 7. And I think there's guys that I'd rather take in front of him. And I like even.
Do you have AJ Green ahead of him?
Yeah.
Do you have Odell Beckham ahead of him?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're already at
yeah.
I agree, though.
It's just and like a lot of people are, the Tyreek Hill lovers out there who are going to be like, no, I'm taking him. Well, I can go ahead.
He's gonna win you games.
Yeah, he's gonna win you games. It's not.
He's gonna have a game where he gets 3 touchdowns,
just
and
watch
180 yards.
But you can't. You got to win more than 6 games in order to make the playoffs, guys. Like, seriously, Hill being your wide receiver one busting is just not. It's not going to work. Now you could also use the strategy of drafting him and then drafting a more consistent second guy.
Right. You can take Tyreek Hill and then get someone who's known
more
for consistency,
like Cooper Kupp, very consistent,
or Adam Thielen type.
Right.
Yeah.
You snag them and then put them right next to Tyreek Hill, whether it's through a trade or through the draft. It makes it out to be like, okay, so you got that consistent guy. He's getting you 10, 15 points. If Tyreek Hill busts, it's okay.
You're still getting 10 to 15 points.
Tyreek Hill I did have his numbers for his dumpster fire game. A dumpster fire game is under 6 points altogether. And that number is 3. So out of the 8 games he busted, 3 of them were under 6 fantasy points.
Dumpster fire.
So he's not. Tyreek Hill, he's a guy that I'm putting a little beware mark next to, and a little red asterisk.
If you like him, take him, but you better have a solid, consistent WR2.
Well, just don't let it bite you in the end. That's the big thing. You understand what you're getting into when you're drafting the guy like Tyreek Hill. DeAndre Hopkins comes in at number 4. Houston Texans wide receiver at 255 fantasy points. Consistency rank of number 3. He had his average points per game 17. He busted 15% of the time. Hopkins is an interesting little player because in standard leagues, Hopkins is a number 1 receiver. He's I think he finished number 1 or 2 in fantasy.
Oh, let me check.
Check on that. But Hopkins,
I think he was number 2.
He was number 2.
Yeah.
So Hopkins finished very high in a half PPR setting, and in full PPR, Hopkins finishes at 4, 5, or 6. I think it's solely because you would think a guy who gets 15 targets, a game would get that production, but he doesn't put up the catch numbers that you want, I guess. And I think that's the only reason why he kind of took a step back this year, is because he wasn't getting. I'm curious to see how many catches he had in the 2018 season because I don't have that in front of me. But I think DeAndre Hopkins, he's a great receiver. I have him in a standard league at number 1 on my board.
Ooh.
I think he is I have Hopkins and then Adams, and those are my 1-2 guys.
Okay.
In a half PPR setting, I'm not sure because he is more consistent than Tyreek Hill and he's more consistent than Antonio Brown, but he also finished number 4, and he doesn't produce as many fantasy points as those guys.
Do you want to know how many catches he had?
How many?
115.
So why the crap is DeAndre Hopkins so low?
I don't know.
Did he get hurt? I don't know. But Hopkins he's a great wide receiver. He's a guy that I would definitely take Hopkins next year over Hill, over Brown. I think that he does have some games where he does bust. But I think he's a solid wide receiver to take. I think he's going to be a top 3 finisher next year.
He was 3rd in the league in receptions.
3rd in the league in receptions.
And 2nd in receiving yards.
Isn't that amazing? That amazes me.
You know who was 2nd in
probably
receptions?
Probably should have finished 3rd.
Zach Ertz.
Flip. Zach Ertz, you freaking... That's ridiculous.
Stud.
I honestly think without Tyreek Hill's ridiculousness, DeAndre Hopkins should have finished 3. I think Hill's not going to finish 3. Brown's not going to finish 2.
Yep.
So I think Hopkins could end up being a top 2 receiver next year.
I agree.
Which is not a super hot take. But one thing that you should beware on, and I noticed this, is that a lot of wide receivers in fantasy have better road, especially the good ones, have better road fantasy point averages than they do home. So the home road splits, the road looks a lot better as an option for a wide receiver. I don't know why that's the case. I don't know if that's a 2018 trend.
I think my guess would be is teams are typically losing on the road. So in the fourth quarter, when they're down 10 points, they're throwing the ball a lot.
Yeah.
Which equals to trash time points, which would equal to more road points. But that's just a guess.
Yeah. But so he does play. He gets 14 points on average at home to rounded up 19 points on the road. So I think, in terms of, you just got to keep an eye on that. Not that you're going to bench DeAndre Hopkins at home on a good matchup, but, or ever bench DeAndre Hopkins. But Hopkins, great option. Let's move to number 5, Michael Thomas.
The guy I know.
This is another guy.
Okay.
He reminds me of Hill. And he ranked 14th in consistency, which was a lot better. He had a 40 bust percentage. Michael Thomas has these games that just blow your mind, and you're like, wow, this guy's good. You watch him. And
talent-wise, too.
Wow,
right.
this guy's
key,
good.
Yeah.
And then he completely disappoints you with just these awful games. It's just, I don't understand why, most of the season, a lot of fantasy experts had Michael Thomas. Number one, number 2, and I watched the rankings every single week for these guys, and it was Michael Thomas 1 and 2, and I always was like, why? The entire season I asked the question of why is Michael Thomas this high? And towards the end of the season he showed why. He's good. He's good. He's talented. But if you're looking for a guy that's going to be consistent, I'm moving Michael Thomas down my board. There's more consistent wide receiver options than Michael Thomas, i.e. Julio Jones, DeAndre Hopkins, and
I don't disagree with that.
Devontae Adams. Michael Thomas scares me. He's another one that I put a little red asterisk next to and say, all right, Michael, if you're there, I'll take you. I like you, but I just don't know. I can't trust him to be my wide receiver.
Michael Thomas is kind of my guy. I love him. Very talented wide receiver.
He's like, I love you, Michael Thomas.
I love Michael Thomas. He's
very good.
He's extremely talented. However, his home road is interesting, which makes sense though. He has 20 points per game at home versus 12.6 on the road.
Yeah,
he plays in a dome. Kind of makes sense. The whole Saints offense is like Drew Brees' numbers are much better at home. Kamara's numbers, like the whole offense is much better at home. So that one makes sense.
Yeah.
But I do still like Michael Thomas. The one thing though that kind of keeps me away from him a little bit is Drew Brees' age, and Drew Brees does have kind of a typical like kind of similar to Brady where he wants to get everybody involved.
Yeah,
the whole offense they use running backs
which
a lot
is why
in the passing game, right? So I do still like Michael Thomas, and I still would probably take him in top 6, maybe even top 5 fantasy wide receivers, but his consistency charts are hard to overlook. 40% bust is pretty high. I would take Julio Jones over him, like you were saying, Hopkins, Antonio Brown, probably Devontae Adams, Odell. Then you're kind of pushing it. I still think he is like a 5-6 guy.
Yeah.
In terms of rankings. I'm not taking in the second round, though.
Yeah.
I think there's still other receivers that will be there in the second round, i.e. Hopkins.
Yeah, late second round, early third.
Yeah.
Same as Tyreek Hill.
Yep.
I think, that's the one thing is I'm not saying I'm not going to draft them because I do like them as players, and any guy that produces 247 or 258 fantasy points for Tyreek Hill, any guy that produces that many fantasy points should definitely be considered for your fantasy team. But I think in fantasy football, consistency is king. And if you want to win your fantasy leagues and you want to win even just your weekly fantasy games, you got to have consistent players. And if you have a guy like Michael Thomas or Tyreek Hill on your team, God forbid you have both.
If you have both guys, one guy will go off. Yeah,
one
exactly.
guy doesn't. Yeah, there you go. But when you're talking about a bust percentage of 53 and 40, it's very difficult for me to look at those guys as high end options when they're busting so much.
Yeah,
it's dangerous to have them on your team.
And consistency ranks, you shouldn't go just by that.
No,
obviously.
You shouldn't just go by that.
But definitely. It is a good tool to keep in mind.
Yeah. So let's move on to number 6. Adam Thielen, 245 fantasy points, consistent rank of 9. He averaged 16 points per game, and his bust percentage was 33%. Home road split 15 to 15, pretty even. Adam Thielen, I love Adam Thielen.
Oh, do you?
Talented, good player. He's a solid, there's always a need for a slot receiver. He's always going to be that. And I think Adam Thielen is a stud. There's no reason for me to believe that he's
not even a slot receiver. He can do both.
He can do both, yeah. And so I think, the only thing that prohibits him from improving is A, that terrible Vikings offensive line, and B, Stefan Diggs getting more targets. So I think Thielen's talented. I think he's going to get the production. I think the only reason why, and everyone references next year, I want to say don't freak out on Adam Thielen. Don't panic because he had a bad second half of the season, and I think you're starting to see that with his average draft pick being in, I think it's the 6th round right now.
Is it really?
Yeah, 5th or 6th round. And so he is fallen. He's fallen.
For me, with Adam Thielen, I've always been on the train of he did struggle at the end of the year.
Forgive me, he's the 4th round.
Okay, so that's still though, that's not bad value for him.
No,
that's definitely something to keep an eye. And I was someone who was kind of against Adam Thielen.
Yeah.
And I was saying Stephon Diggs is going to get more targets. I was kind of saying everything that you were just echoing. But if you're the 4th round is not a bad spot for him.
Yeah.
He's still going to be, I think, a top 10 wide receiver.
Right.
That you can get there. I definitely keep an eye on that.
Right.
And if it keeps dropping.
Oh, yeah. Definitely. Thielen is just, like I said, he's a very good player. And anybody that's as talented as Adam Thielen is going to get the ball passed to him. It's as simple as that. At some point, he's going to have to, like, the second half of the season was rough. It was wide receiver. Like, he was literally the best wide receiver in football in the first half of the season, and the consistency showed it. And then the second half of the season, he fell so far off that he was averaging wide receiver 3 numbers.
Yeah, he was getting...
And it was just not a good situation. Like, if you have a wide receiver 3, you're talking about a flex at best for Adam Thielen, and that was a problem. That was a problem for teams that owned him because he burned them in the second half of the season. And this is why I'm saying, don't let that burn distract you from what Adam Thielen really is. Go out, grab him if you can, and make him your second wide receiver on your team because you're not going to regret it. You're not going to regret it.
That's true. If he's your WR2, you're in a really good spot.
Let's move on to Julio Jones. 245 fantasy points. He had a consistency rank of 7, so he was pretty high up there. His bust percentage was 27%, and he had average points per game 16. His home road split 13 and 18. So Julio Jones is a very good wide receiver, extremely talented. Oh, yeah. If it wasn't for DeAndre Hopkins and who's the other guy I'm thinking of? I think it's just Hopkins. I would say Julio Jones is the second most talented wide receiver in the NFL. AB's up there as well. Julio Jones' only problem this season for me, which is not going to be repeated. It will not be repeated next year. Mark my words. Is that he did not catch touchdowns until later in the season. He was a guy that early I think it was the first 8 weeks of the season, didn't catch a touchdown. He was the only guy keeping pace with Adam Thielen in yardage. Yeah. And he was getting, an obscene amount of targets a game. So it was like Julio Jones had all of the right puzzle pieces there. It just wasn't turning into touchdowns. And I think the early first half of the season, you had Julio Jones struggling to find the end zone, and then when he took off towards the back end of the season, he became the receiver that he was supposed to be all year. I think that's the only reason why he finished number 7. To me, he's a top 3 receiver in this league, and he could probably finish with the top 3 or 4 in fantasy next season. And where to me, I don't see Julio Jones as a guy that you look at next year and say, who he's going to bust. I think there is a little bit concern. There's a little bit of a concern for me in terms of, you have Calvin Ridley as a new, I guess, wide receiver option for them. He's the same type of receiver as Julio Jones, and he's the guy that's going to step into his place when, I guess, Julio moves on. He's 30. I think he's 31 years old. So I think, with the age and the fact that Calvin Ridley is kind of coming in, he might lose a target share a little bit. But I just don't see it affecting Julio Jones all that much. Because in the end, Matt Ryan, that's his guy. That's who he's going to throw to.
That's true. I think with Julio, what you see is what you get. However, you did say you don't think he's going to put up touchdowns and you think he'll do it the whole season rather than just the second half like he did this past year.
Yeah.
But the reason he wasn't getting touchdowns in the first half was because of the emergence of Calvin Ridley.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's going to go away. Now, in the second half, it did kind of because teams actually focused on Calvin Ridley.
Right.
And Matt Ryan, because Matt Ryan's the type of quarterback will just throw it to whoever's open. Mm-hmm. That's why Mohamed Sanu gets a lot of targets too.
Yeah.
So Julio Jones was definitely getting more touchdowns in the second half because teams were focusing on Calvin Ridley. How is that going to play out this upcoming year? Are teams going to still focus on Calvin Ridley a lot? Are they going to start to slow away from him because Julio Jones destroyed everyone in the second half last year? It's going to be interesting to see, but I still think even if they focus on Calvin Ridley, or don't focus on Calvin Ridley, I should say, and kind of focus on Julio Jones, he'll still be Julio Jones. He'll still be a top 5 or top 7 wide receiver.
I hate to put an asterisk next to him as kind of like a beware. I don't want to make it as prominent as the other 2 guys because I would take Julio Jones over Tyreek Hill and Michael Thomas. But
I agree.
I think Julio Jones there is a chance that he could take a step back next year. I don't know how big that's going to be. But there's a chance that could happen. There's also a chance that the guy could completely go off next year, produce the same amount of yardage he was this year, and add on like 10, 15 touchdowns. If that happens, Julio Jones arguably could finish as the best wide receiver in fantasy. But
10 to 15 total. Not
10 to 15 total. But I think Julio, he's a fantastic receiver. He always gets the ball. I mean, the guy gets targeted a crazy amount. He is Matt Ryan's boy, and Matt Ryan will always throw it to him when the time comes. Like, if he needs to move the ball down the field, it's going to Julio Jones. It's not going to Calvin Ridley. Let's move on to Juju Smith-Schuster. I told you we were going to talk about him. He benefits majorly at 229 fantasy points with Antonio Brown. With Antonio Brown. He finished 8th in fantasy with Antonio Brown on the team. For anyone out there, I am the person who disagrees fully with the argument that he can't be a wide receiver one. There is numbers floating around the internet. You can go look them up. That Juju Smith-Schuster had better performances without AB starting and without AB on the field than with AB on the field. So Juju I think he's a talented wide receiver. He's come out of the woodwork a little bit, and in an offense that doesn't have any other receivers, like Juju is going to get the targets, he's going to get the production. Here's my thing. Fantasy is about two things, consistency and targets. The reason why Tyreek Hill is not as consistent is because the guy only gets it thrown to him 7 times a game or so.
Right.
So it's like when you talk about Juju Smith-Schuster, he's going to get targeted 12, 15 times a game. And if that's the case, he's going to be a guy that is going to I don't think he's going to produce the numbers that Antonio Brown did in the past, but I think he could finish in the top 5.
Do you have him ahead of Julio?
No.
Do you have him ahead of Michael Thomas?
That's a tough one. I'll probably say no.
Okay.
I have him ahead of Tyreek Hill. I'd put him ahead of Tyreek
so he's
Hill.
in between Hill and Thomas. All right.
So I would definitely put him up there. I like I said, my only concern is that I think there's a chance that he could probably completely fall flat on his face. And I think there's that same chance we'll talk about when we talk about running backs, that James Conner could also have the fall flat on his face moment. Like there could be, I think it'll only happen to one guy if it does, but Juju is he's shown that he's good. He's shown that he's talented. He's shown that he can step up. And last year he did bust 27% of the time. He had a consistency rank of 8. He was better on the road than he was at home, but I think Juju is definitely a stud and a guy to keep an eye on. Like, I'm not drafting him in the first round.
But he's got that. No, I agree. I think he could be a top 3 receiver. He has that type of upside. Now, I don't think he's gonna, because I just don't believe in Ben Roethlisberger. And it's just like a personal thing.
You hate Big Ben. You've hated him for years.
I don't like Ben Roethlisberger.
Take your Patriots fan and
but no, I mean, I do think Juju's gonna ball this year.
Yeah,
I have him ahead of Hill as well.
Yeah,
and I might have him ahead of Thomas. Like he's pushing top 5.
Yeah, as far as this year, I mean, when you look at what he did, I think that just goes to show you and to prove to you that, hey, listen, this is a guy that's going to be a top receiver next year. We got to move on. Robert Woods, we're only going to get through 10. But Robert Woods, Los Angeles Rams, 219.1 fantasy points, consistency rank of 16, average points per game, 14. He busted 40% of the time, and he was better at home than on the road, which follows the theme of the Rams offense.
Robert Woods, I think, I don't think there's too much to talk about here because I think he's partly he partly produced because Cooper Kupp went down and Brandon Cooks missed time as well.
Right.
I mean, when everybody's healthy in the offense, I don't think he's considered.
Yeah, no. Next year, this is something that I've been thinking about quite a bit when it comes to the Rams wide receiver situation. Is right now you have Cooper Kupp. I don't remember what his ADP is. I think it was like 5th round or 6th round or something. Cooper Kupp, who is clearly the number 1 wide receiver and clearly one of the best wide receivers in fantasy, at least as a wide receiver 2 on teams.
Yeah.
He was playing extremely well before he tore his ACL. And now all of a sudden you're seeing Robert Woods and Brandon Cooks get drafted ahead of Cooper Kupp. People are going to get burned on that.
Yep.
They're going to get burned on that.
Jared Goff's lover is Cooper Kupp.
Now, I prorated the numbers for Cooper Kupp for a full season for fantasy points. he would have finished with 230, which would have put him ahead of Juju Smith-Schuster and put him at 8. So I think that's where it shows, it just goes to show you. I don't think, I agree with you, Robert Woods. He pushed him down the trail. He's not going to produce as much as he did last year unless you get an injury from Cooper Kupp or somebody leaves in the offseason or something. I think that as far as Robert Woods is concerned, I don't like him as a wide receiver too, only because he busted so much. He was consistent at times, but then there were times where he just completely busted, and it was hard. It was hard to have him on your fantasy team at times in the season. You had these moments of like 3 or 4 weeks where he gets 10, 15 points, and you're like, yes, this is great, and then he'd go on like a 2-3 point drought, and you'd be like, oh my gosh, I need somebody else. So it's like that inconsistency and that up and down is what you want to try to avoid in fantasy. And like guys like Adam Thielen or Juju Smith-Schuster as your wide receiver twos. Not as a wide receiver 2 finisher, but as a guy who could be in your second wide receiver position next to a top-end wide receiver. Those guys are going to be, very important for you. And when you have a guy that only gets 40% of the time, Robert Woods could definitely burn you.
I mean, and that was 40% is a decent number for him, considering.
Yeah.
Well, because I mean that number is kind of skewed a little bit because he had a lot of games at the end of the year where he went off when Cooper Kupp was out. So that number, bust percentage, could probably have been higher if it wasn't for that.
Yeah.
If Cooper Kupp never got hurt, that percentage, I think, would be higher than 50%.
Definitely. Let's move on to 10. There were other guys we were going to talk about: Keenan Allen, Stefon Diggs, T.Y. Hilton, Odell Beckham Jr., and Tyler Boyd. We will probably get to them at some point.
Do you want to just mention Odell since it's a new team, Cleveland?
Yeah, after Mike Evans.
Okay.
So 10, we have Mike Evans. Consistency rank 15. He had averaged 14 points per game, 40%. One thing that I found interesting about Mike Evans is that he is a very young wide receiver still.
He is, yeah.
Very young.
People seem to forget.
There's a few guys that I have on a list of like players that I've never drafted before that I probably should take a look at. David Johnson and Mike Evans have been on that list for a while. But I look at Mike Evans and David Johnson, I always thought like, oh, these guys are real old. They're definitely not old.
No.
David Johnson's in like his 5th season, and Mike Evans is like 5th or 6th season. So they're still young.
And Mike Evans was drafted very young as well. So
Mike Evans was drafted very young. So as far as Mike Evans is concerned, I think he took a step back this year. I think it was just the inconsistencies among the quarterback position.
That definitely did not help. I mean, you have Fitzpatrick 1 week, Winston 1 week, Fitzpatrick 1 week, and just goes back and forth. This year, I like Evans actually. He did have a high bust percentage, 40% last year. Consistency rank was 15.
Right. For a guy at 10, that's not bad.
I mean, yeah, at that point that isn't that bad. But you look at the Bruce Arians offense.
Right.
They're going to be throwing the ball
a lot.
They're going to be throwing the ball a lot. Jameis Winston loves Mike Evans too.
Yeah.
I mean, he likes
Jameis
O.J.
Winston
Howard.
He likes O.J. Howard. And he likes
Mike Evans. Mike Evans is going to get targets. I don't see him as being like anything crazy, but if you're getting him at that like 10 spot where he finished last year, I think that's going to be solid value for him. I think he'll finish around the same spot.
Yeah. I'm definitely looking at Mike Evans where he's, his ADP right now, I believe. Let me see where Mike Evans' ADP is. According to the Fantasy Football Calculator, he is going late 2nd round right now. So if
Mike Evans is
Mike Evans, yeah,
that's so. I'm not doing that.
To me, that's a little high. If he was a 3rd or 4th rounder, he's always been a late 2nd round pick. But to me, if I'm looking for Mike Evans, I'll probably do it in the 3rd or 4th round. I think he's going to see a statistical bump. But it is concerning to see him at 10 when he probably should be up there in the 7, 8, or 6 or 7 range. So I like Mike Evans. I'm gonna, if he's on the board, if in the 3rd round or 4th round, I'll take him. But I just don't see him as a huge option that early. Like you're expecting him to be a wide receiver 1. I don't know if he can be that at this point. And when I say wide receiver 1, I'm talking about like a top 5 receiver.
Yeah.
So if you're expecting that from Mike Evans, you're not going to get it. I think for Odell, we'll talk about him next week on the free agency show a little bit more in depth because we have run out of time. So
Odell and the Browns is better right? Would you say better?
Yeah.
Yep. Agreed. AJ Green is not on this list, but he will probably be top 10 as well.
Yeah. He'll probably show improvement.
Yeah.
He was actually.
He got
Green
hurt.
was playing extremely well before he got hurt. He was having one of the best seasons of his career. I was looking at his
people are gonna forget.
Today. Yeah, people are gonna forget AJ Green. But that concludes wide receiver edition of All That Glitters. We'll obviously go over a lot more receivers as the offseason goes along, and give you our thoughts and opinions on where you should draft them, where you should take them. Make sure you bookmark this episode, like I said last week, and save it for draft season in a few months because it's going to give you an edge in the 2019 season. It'll remind you, hey, this guy did this last year. Maybe I should beware. Maybe it's a good idea to look at Adam Thielen and say, oh, well, he sucked in the second half of the season, instead of just looking at numbers. So make sure you listen for next week. We'll go over all the free agent additions. We'll go over everything free agency related and trade related over the last couple weeks or the last week or so, and give you all that information and help you make your decisions for fantasy based on where people went. You got any thoughts for us before we send it off?
The Cleveland Browns
Oh, boy.
are going to win not one,
Super
not
Bowl.
2, not 3, but 4 straight Super Bowl titles.
Flip.
I wouldn't be surprised if they go 7-9. Everybody's fired.
That's true.
If anybody can screw this up,
It's the Brownies.
it's the Browns.
It's true. I won't believe it till I see it. Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Champions podcast. Make sure you follow us on all the social medias and like us, subscribe, and leave a review. See you later, Fantasy Champions.
Peace.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Champions podcast. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes and YouTube and follow us on Twitter @TheFFChamps.